Because people will approach your car, they will bang on the window. You get the odd aggressive person who says, F off.
771,000. That is the number of people in the United States counted sleeping without permanent shelter on a single January night in 2024, an 18% increase over the year before, a record high. And roughly half of the unsheltered among them were not in tents, not under bridges, not in doorways. They were parked on streets in cities like Seattle, Portland, Denver, and Los Angeles, inside vans that most people walked right past without a second look. That is not an accident. It is a system, and this video documents how it works. It might seem strange that someone living in a van would go to elaborate lengths to make it look unoccupied rather than simply finding somewhere legal to park. But the reality behind that choice is layered in ways most people never have to consider. The first barrier is legal. More than half of the 187 largest American cities have laws restricting vehicle dwelling. In Seattle alone, there are 20 separate vehicle ordinances, creating a patchwork where someone might be legal on one block and facing impoundment on the next. Between 2006 and 2019, laws restricting vehicle dwelling increased by 213% nationwide. Los Angeles prohibits vehicle dwelling within one block of any school or park, eliminating enormous stretches of usable street space. The second barrier is enforcement. Even where parking is technically legal, staying in the same spot longer than 72 hours risks a citation. Unpaid fines lead to suspended licenses. A suspended license means the van cannot be driven, and a van that cannot be driven is not a home anymore. That cascade from a single parking ticket to losing shelter entirely is not hypothetical. It has happened to thousands. The third barrier is community pressure. Even where overnight parking is permitted, a van that does not move for several days attracts complaints. Officers respond, and even when no law is being broken, the interaction creates the kind of attention no one in this situation can afford. One man who had lived in a white cargo van in Portland for 8 months said it simply, everyone on the block probably already knew. The trick was making sure nobody cared enough to report it. That meant looking like a vehicle that belonged there, not one that lived there. That is the foundation of everything this video covers. Start with what most people assume. Someone living in a white cargo van tries to blend in by keeping the windows clear and leaving nothing visible on the dashboard. No blankets, no pillows, no signs of habitation. Keep it bare. That instinct is correct, but incomplete. And the gap between correct and complete is where people get caught. Most people who are new to vehicle dwelling focus entirely on the interior. They tuck their sleeping bag behind the passenger seat. They keep food in a bag on the floor. They clear the dash, then they park, turn off the lights, and try to sleep. And it works for a few nights. But the van gives them away before anyone peers through a window. Most people do not realize this. Exterior condition tells a story. A dirty van with road grime on the sides reads as a working vehicle. A van with a recently wiped exterior and clean windows reads differently. A vehicle that is clearly maintained from the inside but not driven much attracts a specific kind of notice. Officers in cities like Denver and Seattle have noted that van exteriors can signal occupancy as clearly as a light visible at 2 in the morning. The second giveaway is movement pattern. A van that relocates every single night can look like someone avoiding detection. A van that stays in one spot for days looks lived in. Neither extreme works. The community knowledge around this is specific. Move enough to look mobile, not so much that the strategy becomes obvious. Third, counterintuitively, too much effort at concealment backfires. Hanging thick curtains in the front windows, covering the windshield from the inside, placing reflective material across every pane of glass. All of these signal that a vehicle is being treated as a dwelling. A plain parked cargo van raises no questions. A van whose every window is deliberately covered raises all of them. Most people stop after clearing the interior. But experienced vehicle dwellers in communities from Chicago to Portland have identified at least 4 distinct layers of invisibility that go far beyond keeping belongings out of sight. The basic approach keeps you safe for a week. What comes next keeps you safe for months. The first method is called the Magnetic Contractor Identity System. It costs between $12 and $25 and has kept some individuals undetected in urban van environments for years. White cargo vans are among the most common commercial vehicles on American roads. Plumbers, electricians, HVAC companies, delivery operations, all of them drive white cargo vans. That shared appearance is the entire foundation. What homeless individuals discovered is that a few specific props shift the psychological category the van falls into. A van parked on a commercial block at 10 at night reads as suspicious. That same white cargo van with a clipboard on the passenger seat, a yellow hard hat on the dash, and a reflective safety vest visible reads as a contractor who had a long day. Nobody calls the police about Dave the plumber. The materials are cheap. A reflective vest costs $3 at any dollar store. A hard hat costs $5 to $8 at a hardware store. Magnetic signs for the side of the van cost $15 to $30 online and come off in seconds, letting the same van appear as a utility vehicle in one neighborhood and a plain, unmarked van 2 miles away. Researchers call the mechanism schema-based perception. The brain categorizes vehicles before processing any details. If surrounding cues match the expected mental category for a working cargo van, attention moves on. The hard hat is not functional. It signals to every passing person, including officers, that this vehicle has already been explained. One man living in his van in Chicago for 14 months developed what he called the 3-prop rule: vest visible, clipboard visible, cold coffee in the cup holder. He said the coffee was the detail nobody anticipated. A half-empty cup says someone was working here earlier. One caution: a fake business name that cannot be verified online raises more suspicion than no name at all. Generic service language outperforms invented company names. Signs also need to come off in residential areas, where a contractor van that never unloads tools draws notice by day 3. The contractor identity handles the exterior, but light from inside the van at night destroys everything this method builds. That requires something completely different. The second method is called the cab blackout partition system. This is the one most people skip. It is also the reason most people get caught. Here's what happens. Someone builds a solid interior setup. They cover the rear windows. They park in a plausible spot. They turn on a small LED light to read before sleep. And from outside, anyone walking past sees a faint glow around the edges of the front windshield because there is no barrier between the living space and the front glass. The interior is hidden. The light is not. This is the most common error documented in vehicle-dwelling communities in Seattle, Portland, and Minneapolis. A light visible through the gap between a van's rear area and its front windows identifies an occupied vehicle more reliably than almost any other signal. The fix costs between $4 and $12 and requires no tools. The material is black fleece. A yard costs about $4 at any fabric store, cut to fit the gap between the back of the front seats and the van ceiling. Attach 4 neodymium magnets at the corners with safety pins, and the fabric snaps to the metal walls, creating a complete barrier. From outside, the front windshield looks exactly like every other empty parked van on the block. The physics is basic. Light travels in straight lines. Block the path between the light source and the front glass, and the glass stays dark. A single layer of heavy dark fabric cuts light transmission by more than 95%, enough to prevent detection from any passing distance. One woman who spent 2 winters in a cargo van in Minneapolis said this was the single change that mattered most. She had been getting knocked on regularly. After installing a $5 piece of fabric with 4 magnets, she went 6 months without a single interaction. the quietest money she had ever spent. Safety note: the partition must allow fast exit to the front in any emergency. Magnetic attachment means it pulls down in under 2 seconds. Nothing should slow an exit. The light barrier handles nighttime visibility, but there is a form of visibility that operates with no lights on at all. Most people never consider it until they have already been found. The third method is the condensation ghost elimination system. It sounds like a chemistry detail, but ask anyone who has spent a winter in a van in Chicago or Denver, and they will say this is where most people unknowingly betray themselves. Every person sleeping inside a closed vehicle breathes out roughly 1 liter of water vapor over an 8-hour night. At cold temperatures, that vapor condenses on metal walls and glass. By morning, every window in the van is fogged, and fogged windows on a parked vehicle in cold weather are one of the clearest indicators that someone slept inside. This is a primary trigger for morning police interactions in colder cities. Officers and neighbors both notice it. A fogged cargo van on a street of dry-windowed parked cars in Minneapolis or Seattle reads as obviously as a lit interior at midnight. The community-developed solution costs under $8. First, a container of damp rid or its dollar store equivalent. Calcium chloride crystals pull water vapor from the air before it reaches the glass. One container at each end of the interior reduces surface condensation by 60 to 70% overnight. Refillable versions cost about $6 and last 2 to 3 weeks. Second, a sock filled with 200 grams of silica gel beads, available in bulk for under $2. Placed against the glass surfaces most prone to fogging, silica gel absorbs the moisture layer before it becomes visible. Experienced individuals in Portland place a second sock in the footwell on coldest nights, where pooling cold air accelerates condensation fastest. Here's the part most people miss. Moisture absorbers alone do not work in very cold conditions. The real solution is counterintuitive: a half-inch window gap. Cracking a front window allows humid interior air to escape and be replaced by drier outside air. The van loses a little heat. What it gains is humidity below the condensation threshold, clear windows by morning, an unoccupied-looking vehicle on a frozen street. When this method works, there is nothing to see, which is exactly the point. And it is free. There is one more layer to this system, and it manages all the others, where the van is when it moves and how often. Skipping this layer makes every other method vulnerable. The fourth method is the 7-zone rotation map. It makes every other method sustainable. Without it, even the best van setup fails inside 2 weeks. Here's the problem it solves. In most cities, a vehicle can legally stay on a public street for 72 hours before being cited. But the real limit is not legal. It is human memory. A neighbor who sees the same white cargo van parked outside their house 4 mornings in a row begins to notice. By day 5, they are paying attention. By day 7, they have called it in. The practical window in residential areas is about 3 days before a pattern registers. 7 zones, 7 distinct parking locations across the city, each in a different neighborhood, each with other vehicles nearby for blending. Rotate through all 7 before returning to any one spot. With 1 or 2 nights per zone, the full rotation takes roughly 2 weeks. That is the memory reset threshold. By the time the van returns to Zone 1, whoever might have noticed it has completely forgotten it. Zone selection criteria refined in Denver, Chicago, and Seattle are specific. Each zone should be within 2 miles of a 24-hour business for bathroom access. Each should have surrounding vehicles, because a single van on an empty block looks like an installation, not parking. Industrial areas work well overnight because few residents are watching. Areas near hospitals work well because parked vehicles there need no explanation. Timing matters as much as location. Arrive after 10 at night, leave before 7 in the morning. That 9-hour window is the stealth operating zone in most environments. Operating within it across 7 locations creates a van that, from any neighbor's perspective, has never been there long enough to matter. One man who had lived in a cargo van in Seattle for over 2 years without a single citation credited rotation above everything. He said the van was not invisible, it was forgettable. And forgettable is better because invisible draws curiosity, while forgettable draws nothing at all. All 4 methods together form a complete system. But experienced van dwellers have found they interact in ways that create optimization opportunities most people never find on their own. The 4 methods work individually, but those who have lived undetected for the longest periods are not the ones who use each method correctly in isolation. They are the ones who understand how the methods layer. The first layering insight is identity zone match. The magnetic contractor identity system works best where contractor vehicles are expected: industrial zones, commercial strips near hardware stores, areas with visible construction. Contractor props in a quiet residential cul-de-sac create the wrong context. The same props that read as plausible in one neighborhood read as suspicious in another. Matching identity to zone doubles the effectiveness of both. The second insight is the condensation rotation sequence. The moisture system works best when a van has occupied a spot for fewer than 2 nights. A van parked in cold conditions for 3 or more consecutive nights builds a pattern of repeated morning condensation management, which itself becomes a behavioral tell. Rotating before that pattern can be observed prevents it from developing. The third insight is genuinely counterintuitive. In cities like Portland and San Diego, experienced vehicle dwellers have found that being slightly visible during daytime hours reduces nighttime suspicion. A van that neighbors have seen moving, have watched someone exit, registers as a known quantity. Unknown quantities prompt calls to police. A van that follows ordinary patterns becomes background noise. Completely invisible behavior sometimes draws more attention than ordinary visible behavior. The fourth is seasonal. Summer heat makes interior temperature a problem, requiring cracked windows for cooling, which then requires the partition system to prevent light bleed through those gaps. In Chicago, where winters reach -15 degrees and summers exceed 90 degrees, all seasonal variations must run simultaneously. That level of integrated adaptation is not improvisation, it is engineering. This system, in full form, involves 4 interlocking methods: the magnetic contractor identity system, the cab blackout partition, the condensation ghost elimination approach, and the 7-zone rotation map. Together they create what experienced vehicle dwellers call sustainable invisibility. Not a single trick, but an integrated architecture that holds up under conditions most people will never face. Each method alone buys a few nights. Together they have bought years. What makes this worth documenting is not the ingenuity of any one element. It is the fact that this knowledge was developed collectively, passed between homeless individuals in Seattle parking lots and Portland warming centers and Chicago community forums, refined through failure, shared through necessity. No single person invented the rotation map. No one figured out that a half-inch gap prevents condensation better than a pound of silica gel. These are community discoveries accumulated over years of real-world testing. One woman who had lived in a cargo van in Denver for nearly 3 years put it plainly. The van was not a last resort. It was a solution. A bad solution to an impossible situation, but one that required more intelligence, more planning, and more adaptive thinking than anything she had done in a house life. The hardest part was accepting she had become skilled at something no one would ever list on a resume. The expertise documented here represents not failure, but a discipline housing systems have no category for, developed through necessity and refined through community. If spreading this knowledge matters to you, subscribing means more people find it. Our like helps further than you might expect. And the video on screen right now covers a completely different survival challenge that homeless communities have approached with the same quiet ingenuity. Click it. If you want this reaching people currently living through these conditions and not just curious about them, hyping this video is how it gets there.